The Western Philosophy, Chapter1, Section10, Criticism. And now, what shall we say of this whole utopia? Is it feasible? And if not, has it any practicable features which we could turn to contemporary use? Has it ever in any place or measure been realized? At least the last question must be answered in Plato's favor. For 1,000 years, Europe was ruled by an order of guardians, considerably like that which was visioned by our philosopher. During the Middle Ages, it was customary to classify the population of Christendom into liberators, workers, belators, soldiers, and orators, clergy. The last group, though small in number, monopolized the instruments and opportunities of culture and ruled with almost unlimited sway half of the most powerful continent on the globe. The clergy, like Plato's guardians, were placed in authority not by the suffrages of the people, but by their talent, as shown in ecclesiastical studies and administration, by their disposition to a life of meditation and simplicity. And perhaps it should be added, by the influence of their relatives with the powers of state and the church. In the latter half of the period in which they ruled, the clergy were as free from family cares as even Plato could desire, and in some cases it would seem they enjoyed no little of the reproductive freedom accorded to the guardians. Celibacy was part of the psychological structure of the power of the clergy. For, on the one hand, they were unimpeded by the narrowing egoism of the family, and on the other, their apparent superiority to the core of the flesh added to the awe in which lay sinners held them, and to the readiness of these sinners to bear their lives in the confessional. Much of the politics of Catholicism was derived from Plato's royal lies or influenced by them. The ideas of heaven, purgatory, and hell, in their medieval form, are traceable to the last book of the Republic. The cosmology of scholasticism comes largely from the Timaeus. The doctrine of realism, the objective reality of general ideas was an interpretation of the doctrine of ideas. Even the educational quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music was modeled on the curriculum outlined in Plato. With this body of doctrine, the people of Europe were ruled with hardly any resort to force. And they accepted these rules so readily that for 1,000 years they contributed plentiful material support to their rulers and asked no voice in the government, nor was this acquiescence confined to the general population. Merchants and soldiers, feudal chieftains, and civil powers all bent the knee to Rome. It was an aristocracy of no mean political sagacity. It built probably the most marvelous and powerful organization which the world has ever known. The Jesuits, who for a time ruled Paraguay, were semi-Platonic guardians, a clerical oligarchy empowered by the possession of knowledge and skill in the midst of a barbarian population, and for a time the Communist Party, which ruled Russia after the Revolution of November 1917, took a form strangely reminiscent of the Republic. They were a small minority, held together almost by religious conviction, wielding the weapons of orthodoxy and excommunication, as sternly devoted to their cause as any saint to his, and living a frugal existence while ruling half the soil of Europe. Such examples indicate that within limits and with modifications, Plato's plan is practicable, and indeed he himself had derived largely from actual practice as seen on his travels. He had been impressed by the Egyptian theocracy. Here was a great and ancient civilization ruled by a small priestly class, and compared with the bickering and tyranny and incompetence of the Athenian ecclesial, Plato felt that the Egyptian government represented a much higher form of state. In Italy, he had stayed for a time with the Pythagorean community, vegetarian and communist, which had for generations controlled the Greek colony in which it lived. In Sparta, he had seen a small ruling class living a hard and simple life in common in the midst of a subject population, eating together, restricting mating for eugenic ends, and giving to the brave the privilege of many wives. He had no doubt heard Euripides advocate a community of wives, the liberation of slaves, and the pacification of the Greek world by an Hellenic league. No doubt, too, he knew some of the cynics who had developed a strong communist movement among what one would now call the Socratic left. In short, Plato must have felt that in propounding his plan he was not making an impossible advance on realities which his eyes had seen. Yet critics from Aristotle's day to ours have found in the Republic many an opening for objection and doubt. These things and many others, says the Stagyrite with cynical brevity, have been invented several times over in the course of ages. It is very pretty to plan a society in which all men will be brothers, but to extend such a term to all our male contemporaries is to water out of it all warmth and significance. So, with common property, it would mean a dilution of responsibility. When everything belongs to everybody, nobody will take care of anything. And finally, argues the great conservative, communism would fling people into an intolerable continuity of contact. It would leave no room for privacy or individuality, and it would presume such virtues of patience and cooperation as only a saintly minority possesses. We must neither assume a standard of virtue which is above ordinary persons, nor an education which is exceptionally favored by nature and circumstance. But we must have regard to the life which the majority can share, and to the forms of government to which states in general can attain. So far, Plato's greatest and most jealous pupil, and most of the criticisms of later date strike the same chord. Plato underrated. We are told the force of custom accumulated in the institution of monogamy and in the moral code attached to that institution. He underestimated the possessive jealousy of males in supposing that a man would be content to have merely an adequate portion of a wife. He minimized the material instinct in supposing that mothers would agree to have their children taken from them and brought up in a heartless anonymity. And above all, he forgot that in abolishing the family he was destroying the great nurse of morals and the chief source of those cooperative and communistic habits, which would have to be the psychological basis of the state. With unrivaled eloquence, he sawed off the branch on which he sat. To all these criticisms, one can reply very simply that they destroy a straw man. Plato explicitly exempts the majority from his communistic plan. He recognizes clearly enough that only a few are capable of the material self-denial which he proposes for his ruling class. Only the guardians will call every guardian brother or sister. Only the guardians will be without gold or goods. The vast majority will retain all respectable institutions, property, money, luxury, competition, and whatever privacy they may desire. They will have marriage as monogamic as they can bear, and all the morals derived from it and from the family. The fathers shall keep their wives, and the mothers shall keep their children. Ad libitum and nascium. As to the guardians, their need is not so much communistic disposition as a sense of honor and the love of it. Pride and not kindness is to hold them up. And as for the material instinct, it is not strong before the birth or even the growth of the child. The average mother accepts the newborn baby rather with resignation than with joy. Love for it is a development, not a sudden miracle, and grows as the child grows, as it takes form under the painstaking care of the mother, not until it has become the embodiment of material artistry does it irrevocably catch the heart. Other objections are economic rather than psychological. Plato's Republic, it is argued, denounced the division of every city into two cities and then offers us a city divided into three. The answer is that the division in the first case is by economic conflict. In Plato's state, the guardian and auxiliary classes are specifically excluded from participation in this competition for good and goods. But then the guardians would have power without responsibility, and would not this lead to tyranny? Not at all. They have political power and direction, but no economic power or wealth. The economic class, if dissatisfied with the guardian's mode of rule, could hold up the food supply. As parliaments control executives by holding up the budget, well, then, if the guardians have political but not economic power, how can they maintain their rule? Have not Harrington and Marx and many others shown that political power is a reflex of economic power and becomes precarious as soon as economic power passes to a politically subject group, as to the middle classes in the 18th century. This is a very fundamental objection, and perhaps a fatal one. The answer might be made that the power of the Roman Catholic Church, which brought even kings to kneel at Canossa, was based in its earlier centuries of rule rather on the inculcation of dogmas than on the strategy of wealth. But it may be that the long dominion of the church was due to the agricultural condition of Europe. An agricultural population is inclined to supernatural belief by its helpless dependence on the caprice of the elements, and by that inability to control nature, which always leads to fear and thence to worship. When industry and commerce developed a new type of mind, and man arose more realistic and terrestrial, and the power of the church began to crumble as soon as it came into conflict with this new economic fact. Political power must repeatedly readjust itself to the changing balance of economic forces. The economic dependence of Plato's guardians on the economic class would very soon reduce them to the controlled political executives of that class. Even the manipulation of military power would no longer forestall this inevitable issue anymore. Then the military forces of revolutionary Russia could prevent the development of a proprietary individualism among the peasants who controlled the growth of food and therefore the fate of the nation. Only this would remain to Plato, that even though political policies must be determined by the economically dominant group, it is better that those policies should be administered by officials specifically prepared for the purpose than by men who stumble out of commerce or manufacturing into political office without any training in the arts of statesmanship.